For 20 long years, the story of my mother's death was a closed book, a settled tragedy I carried inside me like a smooth, worn stone. It was the classic, cruel tale of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, a narrative etched into the foundation of my life, a scar that had long since faded from a raw wound into a silvery line I rarely noticed. I had meticulously constructed an entirely new existence for myself, an ocean away from the whispering ghosts that haunted the sun-baked streets of our small Spanish town. I was a different person, living a different life. But the foundations of that life, everything I believed to be true, crumbled into dust on the day my old high school teacher, Miss Hale, a woman I hadn't seen in 2 decades, handed me an old, yellowed envelope she had kept hidden for all that time. It was a letter from my mother, a voice from beyond the grave. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. It helps a lot. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I was 42 years old when I discovered that my entire life had been built upon a foundation of devastating lies. The letter in my trembling hands began with 3 simple words, words that unraveled the very fabric of my reality and set in motion a plot for revenge that would not only bring down a family empire but would also expose a secret so profoundly dark, so much worse than mere stolen money, that it would change the very definition of who I was. 3 words that still echo in the silence of my sleepless nights, a constant, haunting whisper, "He is lying." I can still recall the exact moment my world fractured, the precise second the ground beneath my feet gave way. I was only 14, a girl with wide, naive eyes living in a dusty town in the south of Spain, where the humid sea air always carried the mingled scents of salt and broken promises. In that world, my mother, Isabella, was the sun around which my entire universe revolved. She possessed a mane of raven hair that fell like waves of midnight silk, a laugh so full and vibrant it could chase away the darkest of storms, and hands that seemed to weave pure magic into every simple meal she cooked and every bedtime story she told. She was a single mom, a fortress of fierce, unyielding love, working grueling double shifts at the local cannery to ensure the lights stayed on, and there was always food on our small kitchen table. To me, she was everything. I idolized the very ground she walked on. She was all I had after my father vanished when I was too young to even form a lasting memory of his face. He was a ghost in our lives, a name spoken only in hushed, sorrowful whispers, a void that my mother tirelessly filled with an overwhelming, all-encompassing love. But on one dreary, rain-swept autumn night, her brilliant light was extinguished in an instant. She collapsed right there in our small kitchen, a pile of potatoes she had just peeled scattering like pale stones across the worn linoleum floor. She was clutching her chest, her beautiful, dark eyes wide, locked on mine with a terrifying expression I couldn't possibly comprehend. The doctors at our tiny, underfunded local clinic delivered the verdict with a somber finality: a sudden, massive heart failure. A cruel, random twist of genetic fate that had stolen her away at the impossibly young age of 38. There had been no warning signs, no prolonged sickness, no opportunity to say a final, meaningful goodbye. One moment she was there, the vibrant center of my world, and the next she was just gone. In the suffocating aftermath, I was a child adrift on an endless ocean of grief, unmoored and utterly alone. I was shuttled off to live with my Aunt Sophia and her husband, my Uncle Ramon. Their home was a cramped, dark apartment filled with a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Sophia, my mother's sister, a woman who had always seemed to languish resentfully in my mother's radiant shadow, treated me with a weary, detached sense of duty, as if I were a piece of unclaimed luggage from her sister's shipwrecked life that she was now burdened with. Uncle Ramon, a quiet, meticulously calculating man who worked as a junior accountant at the same cannery as my mother, would occasionally pat my head with a display of detached sympathy, but his eyes were always distant, constantly somewhere else. I learned to bury my pain deep inside, to tell myself that their coldness was just their own clumsy way of processing their grief. I repeated the hollow mantra that tragedy is a part of life. But I could never fully shake the memory of my mother's last words, the desperate, gasped phrase that had made no sense to me at the time. "Elena, protect the truth." In my childish grief, I dismissed it as the incoherent rambling of a dying woman. I was so naive. So devastatingly, tragically naive. The years that followed blurred into a monochrome montage of survival. I built impenetrable walls around the gaping hole my mother had left in my heart, methodically filling the emptiness with the cold logic of books and the certainty of mathematical equations. I threw myself into my studies with a singular, desperate focus, and it was then that Miss Margaret Hale walked into my life. She was my American exchange teacher, a breath of crisp, clean air in my stale, provincial world. She was impossibly poised, overwhelmingly sharp, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to possess the uncanny ability to see right through my carefully constructed defenses. She spoke of Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters as if they were living, breathing women who had fought their own brutal battles with words as their only weapons. Coming from a wealthy, established Boston family, she taught English literature with a fiery passion that ignited something dormant within me, a hunger for stories, for language, for a reality far beyond the confines of my town. She noticed me immediately, the quiet, sad girl scribbling furiously in a notebook at the back of the room. One afternoon, she pulled me aside, her expression a careful blend of curiosity and profound empathy. "Elena, you have a voice," she said, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. It was the first genuine act of kindness, the first touch of warmth I had felt in years. "Don't let your loss be what silences it." She became my mentor, my guide, my anchor in the storm of my adolescence. She flooded me with books, coached me tirelessly after school, and helped me craft college application essays with a newfound voice I didn't even recognize as my own. For 2 crucial years, she was the architect of my escape. She was the one who pushed me to apply to universities in the United States, to dream of a life bigger than my aunt and uncle's suffocating apartment and the town that would forever reek of my mother's death. When the letter arrived offering me a full scholarship to a prestigious American university, it was Miss Hale who held me in a tight embrace at the airport, her sharp blue eyes shining with an unshed brightness. "Write to me, Elena," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place at the time. "Always." And I did at first. But then my new life in America, a whirlwind of new experiences and challenges, took over. The past, and the people in it, began to fade like an old photograph. I didn't know it then, but she had never forgotten me. Not for a single day. Fast forward 2 decades. I am 42 years old, a successful freelance translator living in a sleek, minimalist apartment in New York City. My life is a testament to order, control, and safety. My days are a dizzying whirlwind of complex legal documents and precise financial contracts. My world is defined by unassailable facts and the rigid certainty of language. Then, the letter arrived. An old, yellowed envelope, its paper brittle with age, postmarked from Spain, and forwarded through a labyrinth of old contacts and addresses. It was addressed to me, in my mother's elegant, unmistakable looping script. My hands, normally so steady and precise in my work, trembled uncontrollably as I broke the seal. Through a sudden, stinging rush of tears, the glittering Manhattan skyline outside my window blurred into a meaningless smear of light. Inside was a single page, the ink slightly faded, dated just 1 week before her death. Her words were not a loving farewell. They were a desperate, chilling warning. "My dearest Elena," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. Your Aunt Sophia and your Uncle Ramon, they have lied to you about everything. Especially about your father. He didn't abandon us. They drove him away, and then they stole everything from us to build their empire. The cannery shares that were your birthright, the deed to our home, it was all taken with forged papers. They are not who they seem. Miss Hale knows. She saw the documents. Trust no one in the family. The truth is your only weapon. Burn this letter. Love eternal, Mama." The room began to spin violently. Forged papers, a stolen inheritance. My aunt and uncle, the couple who had taken me in, who had always made me feel like such an immense burden, had they orchestrated my entire life's tragedy? Memories I had suppressed for years came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. Their sudden, unexplained explosion of wealth in the months immediately following my mother's death. Uncle Ramon's shocking, meteoric promotion from a junior accountant to the chief financial officer of the entire cannery, the enormous new villa they constructed on the coast while I was scraping by in a foreign country. surviving on scholarships and grueling part-time jobs. The scattered pieces of my past slammed into place with a sickening, horrifying clarity. A cold, metallic panic clawed at my throat. I hadn't spoken to them in over a decade, severing ties to escape the coldness, but now I could see their faces in my mind, their expressions of weary sympathy twisted into predatory, grinning masks. I frantically dug through decades of old emails, my fingers flying across the keyboard, searching desperately for Ms. Hale's contact information. I finally found an address linked to a university in Massachusetts. Against every instinct screaming at me to be cautious, to think things through, I booked a flight. The past was no longer a ghost. It was a debt, and the time had come to collect. The drive from the Boston airport to her home felt endless, each mile stretching into an eternity of suspense. I found her in a quaint professor's bungalow, a charming house nearly swallowed by thick, creeping ivy. When she opened the door, we just stared at each other across the threshold of 20 years. The passage of time had etched a network of fine lines around her sharp blue eyes and streaked her dark hair with elegant threads of silver, but it was undeniably her. "Elena!" she breathed, her voice a fragile mix of profound shock and what sounded, bizarrely like relief. "My God, it's really you!" We embraced, a clumsy, emotional collision of past and present, of gratitude and unspoken questions. Over tea in her cluttered, book-filled study, a room that smelled of old paper, ink, and dried lavender, I laid out the contents of my mother's letter, my voice shaking as I recounted the terrible accusations. As I spoke, I watched the color drain completely from her face. Without saying a single word, she rose, walked to a tall, imposing bookshelf, and retrieved a small, locked wooden box. With a trembling hand, she turned a tiny key in the lock and opened it. From inside, she pulled out a letter of her own, an envelope nearly identical to the one I had received, in my mother's unmistakable script. "If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. Your mother gave this to me just days before." Her voice trailed off, thick with a sorrow that felt ancient and heavy. She was terrified, Elena. She had come to believe they were tampering with her health records, doing things to intentionally stress her, trying to push her fragile heart over the edge. But she didn't have any concrete proof. She told me she was trying to gather it, that she had hidden something important. Miss Hale's eyes, those same piercing blue eyes that had once offered me so much hope, now filled with a deep, haunting guilt. She reached back into the box and handed me a faded, folded photocopy. My fingers felt numb as I unfolded it. It was a series of bank statements, detailing a number of large, unauthorized transfers from the cannery's corporate accounts into a private, offshore account under the names of Ramon and Sofia Vasquez. The document had been notarized. The date on the notary stamp was just 5 days before my mother died. This was it. This was the proof she had been desperately searching for. The revelation hit me like a shard of ice plunged directly into my heart. My Aunt Sophia, my mother's own sister, simmering with a lifetime of bitter, corrosive jealousy, and Uncle Ramon, the quiet, unassuming accountant, always calculating the angles in the background. They had posed as grieving family, taking me in like a pitiable trophy from their conquest, all while they were building a glittering empire on the foundations of our stolen legacy. The rage that began to build inside me wasn't hot and fiery. It was a cold, patient, and meticulous thing. I didn't want simple violence. That was their crude, brutish language. No, my revenge would be a masterpiece of exposure. A slow, torturous, and public unraveling of their perfect, gilded lives, thread by painful thread that my first move was to return to the belly of the beast. I flew back to Spain under an assumed name, a ghost from a past they believed long buried. I sent them an anonymous, professionally designed invitation to a lavish family reunion, a contrived event to celebrate their company's 20th anniversary, and I baited to reconnect with their long-lost niece. I needed to see their faces up close, to walk the halls of the life they had stolen from me. Posing as the nostalgic, forgiving niece, I sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany dinner table in their opulent villa, a sprawling, gaudy monument to their insatiable greed. Sophia, now older but still dripping with a venom thinly veiled by designer silks and expensive jewelry, cooed over old family photos. "You have done so well for yourself, Elena," she said, her smile a practiced, empty gesture that never once reached her cold eyes. "There's no need to dwell on the painful past." Uncle Ramon, now a portly, booming figure of importance, poured glasses of vintage wine with a flourish. But I saw the fine sheen of sweat on his brow in the cool, air-conditioned room. I saw how his eyes darted nervously to his wife whenever I so much as mentioned my mother's name. That night, claiming jet lag, I retired to my guest room, a room ironically and cruelly filled with my mother's old, salvaged furniture. On a shelf, as if placed there for a museum exhibit, was her old jewelry box. After I was certain they were asleep, I put my plan into action. A tech-savvy friend in New York had equipped me with a small, innocuous-looking device. It wasn't anything illegal, just a clever little tool designed to crack their home Wi-Fi password by cycling through publicly available information like their birthdays, anniversaries, and even their pets' names. It took less than an hour. I was in. 4 hours, I sat in the oppressive darkness, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face, and I sifted through the digital guts of their lives. And then there it was, folder after folder of systematic corruption. Encrypted emails containing explicit details of the forgery of my mother's signature on legal documents. Complex spreadsheets tracking the movement of stolen funds into a web of offshore accounts. But the most chilling discovery was a folder labeled simply Project Silence. It was a ledger, a meticulously crafted business plan for my mother's demise. It wasn't a plot for physical harm, but for something far more insidious, engineered despair. It detailed a systematic campaign of psychological warfare. Anonymous, threatening letters sent to her workplace, accusing her of theft and incompetence. Vicious rumors spread throughout our small town to isolate her from her friends. A record of specific actions taken by Ramon at the cannery to overload her with impossible deadlines and unbearable stress, all designed to make her seem unstable and erratic. They hadn't used a physical weapon. They had systematically, methodically, and intentionally broken her heart. Near dawn, driven by a sudden hunch, I crept out into the hallway. Behind a large, ostentatious wedding portrait of them, I found the faint outline of a small, hidden safe. The combination was laughably simple, their anniversary. Inside, beneath stacks of emergency cash, I found it. My mother's original, untouched will, clearly and legally leaving 51% of the cannery shares, a controlling interest, to me, her only child. They had forged a new one after she died, leaving themselves everything. I photographed every single document, uploaded the encrypted files to a secure cloud server, and sent a protected copy to Ms. Hale. But as the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the stolen luxury of their home, a new, deeply unsettling thought began to creep into my mind. Why had my mother, a woman betrayed by her own sister, trusted an American exchange teacher so completely and with such a dangerous secret? Paranoia, a bitter inheritance from my duplicitous family, began to take root in my soul. Was my kind mentor truly an ally, or was she just another player in a much larger, darker game? Back in the sterile safety of my New York apartment, I began to escalate my attack. My first move was a series of carefully worded, anonymous tips sent to a handful of influential and notoriously aggressive Spanish financial journalists. I sent them tantalizing hints of financial irregularities at the cannery, backed by just enough redacted evidence from their own server to start a raging fire. The whispers began almost immediately. Rumors of a massive, impending government audit began to circulate. Investors grew nervous. Uncle Ramon's calls to me became more frequent, his booming voice strained with a poorly concealed panic. "Elena, darling, just checking in," he'd say, his tone dripping with false bonhomie. "I hope you haven't been bothered by these silly, baseless rumors." I played the part of the innocent, concerned niece to perfection, my voice syrupy with fake concern. Meanwhile, I turned their own cruel weapons against them. I launched my own campaign of psychological warfare. Late-night voicemails from untraceable burner phones, containing nothing but heavy, menacing silence. An anonymous email sent to Sophia containing a single, high-resolution photograph of my mother's grave. Untraceable text messages sent at all hours of the night with simple, Terrifying phrases. "We know what you did." There were no threats, no demands for money. Just the relentless, unnerving echoes of their own sins, creeping back to haunt them. It worked spectacularly. Sophia's perfectly curated social media presence began to crack, with vague, desperate posts about unbearable family stress and betrayals from those you trust. Their empire, built on a foundation of lies, began to teeter on the brink of collapse. As the pressure mounted on them, I dug deeper into Miss Hale's role in this twisted drama. A disturbing detail emerged from the files I had stolen, a scanned witness statement, signed by Ms. Margaret Hale, vouching for the authenticity of some of the initial forgeries Ramon had used to seize control. Had she been in on it from the beginning? My blood ran cold, but I kept digging, and then I found it, a chain of blackmailed correspondence. Uncle Ramon had discovered a rumor about a brief, illicit affair Miss Hale had had during her time as an exchange teacher and had threatened to expose her, ruin her career, and destroy her marriage, forcing her to sign the false statement and remain silent. She wasn't a perpetrator. She was just another one of their victims. Then, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. A plain cardboard package from Boston with no return address and no note. Inside was a single document, a copy of my original U.S. visa application from over 20 years ago. But it was an expert forgery, made to look as if I had bribed an immigration official to secure my entry. And at the bottom, endorsing the fraudulent application, was the forged signature of Ms. Margaret Hale. Pure, unadulterated horror gripped me. My scholarship, the one that had always seemed too good to be true. Ms. Hale's intense, almost obsessive investment in my future. Her tearful, emotional goodbye at the airport. The real, devastating, world-shattering truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just Elena Vasquez. I was Elena Hale Vasquez. Ms. Hale, my kind-hearted, intellectual mentor, was my biological mother. Isabella, the fierce, loving woman who raised me, had had a secret affair with an American colleague years ago. Ms. Hale, unable to have children of her own, had arranged to have me, keeping her identity a secret while my mother raised me in Spain. She had orchestrated my entire escape to America, not as a mentor, but as a mother desperately trying to reclaim the daughter she could never acknowledge. Uncle Ramon had discovered this earth-shattering secret. It was the ultimate blackmail material. He had used it to control my mother Isabella, and ultimately, to steal her fortune and her life. My mother's death wasn't just about money. It was about burying the secret forever. Miss Hale's message, passed to me through that old, yellowed letter, finally made sense. You must know, it was her guilt-ridden, 20-year-late confession. And in that moment, my quest for revenge was no longer just for the woman who raised me. It was for the life of lies all three of us had been forced to live. This cataclysmic revelation didn't break me. It forged my rage into something harder, sharper, and more resilient than steel. I was no longer the grieving, vengeful orphan. I was the cold, calculating architect of their ruin. First, the financial blow. Through an anonymous, high-powered law firm, I leaked the entire Project Silence ledger and the records of their offshore accounts directly to the cannery's board of directors. Simultaneously, I had my mother's original, authentic will legally authenticated and filed. The evidence was irrefutable and overwhelming. Ramon was suspended immediately, pending a criminal investigation. Next, their precious reputations. I fed the blackmail chain, Ramon's vicious threats against Miss Hale, to a ruthless online industry blog known for its take-no-prisoners approach. The story went viral overnight, branding him not just a thief, but a monstrous pariah. For Sophia, the attack was more personal, more surgical. I leaked partial bank records to the boards of the numerous charities she used to bolster her public image. The mere whispers of embezzlement and misappropriated funds were all it took. Her wealthy donors fled, and her carefully constructed image as a philanthropic socialite crumbled into dust. But the grand finale was yet to come. I tricked them into a family reconciliation meeting at their gaudy villa, dangling the possibility of a private, out-of-court settlement. The entire house was bugged. High definition, hidden cameras were live streaming to a private server. I sat across from them, a portrait of perfect calm, and I systematically dismantled them with their own twisted tools. I gaslit them into a full confession. "I know you were only trying to protect the family from the scandal of it all," I'd say with a voice full of fake sympathy. Believing I possessed even more proof than I did, they began to crack, turning on each other, each trying desperately to shift the blame. She was out of control. Her heart was weak. Ramon sputtered, his face slick with sweat. We only wanted to protect the family name. She would have ruined us all. Sophia wailed, her facade finally shattering. The edited, damning footage went public that night. I didn't want them in prison. That felt too simple, too quick. I wanted a more poetic, a more lingering ruin. The video triggered their complete and total financial and social collapse. Bankruptcy. The villa was seized by the bank. Their empire was auctioned off, piece by stolen piece, with the proceeds legally diverted back to me. I watched from afar as their world fractured and disintegrated. Sophia, unable to cope with the public humiliation and total loss of her status, was institutionalized. Ramon ended up alone, destitute, and broke, living in a tiny, government-subsidized flat, leaving dozens of rambling, begging voicemails on a phone number I had long since disconnected. They weren't dead. They were forced to live, every single day, with the ghosts of what they had done. I had simply given them a mirror, and the reflection had utterly shattered them. In the quiet, echoing aftermath, I sit in my apartment, the one that overlooks the Hudson River. I am 42 years old, and for the first time in my life, I feel almost whole. There was one final confrontation. I met with Ms. Hale, my mother. She wept. She apologized. She laid bare the crushing weight of the guilt she had carried for decades. Our bond is not a simple, happy reunion from a storybook. It is complex, fraught, and haunted by the ghosts of lost time and unspoken truths. But it is real. It is a new truth we are building together, day by day, from the wreckage of the past. Vengeance didn't heal me. It didn't bring Isabella back, and it didn't erase the lonely, difficult years. And yet, there is a quiet, profound vindication in knowing the truth. Did I have to become a monster to fight monsters? Perhaps a part of me did. But in exposing their lifetime of lies, I reclaimed my own truth. I am the daughter of two mothers, one who gave me life, and one who gave me her love. I am a survivor. The salty air from that small town in Spain no longer tastes of forgotten promises and bitter grief. Now it tastes of freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.